The 2023 NBA offseason is here, which is frankly one of the most exciting times when it comes to being a basketball fan, because even when there is no basketball, trades, free agency signings, the draft, whatever it may be, it's just fun seeing teams change things around. And with that, I want to talk about what I think every single team in the league should do from just an individual move standpoint. So yeah, let's get into it. Real quick before I get into this video, if you end up enjoying it, please be sure to subscribe for 3 videos a week. Also drop a like, it only takes 1 second and makes a massive difference in how the video performs in the YouTube algorithm. Also, I want to put a disclaimer here. A lot of these ideas are much more of a rough idea just because for the sake of the off season rather than specifically trades, because I've done trade specific videos. This is just the general direction I think teams should go in terms of decisions they're going to make with their roster. There are some more specific things here or there, but it's not a dead-on, this is exactly what they need to do type of vibe. Anyways, I've rambled long enough. Also, there were I think 2 teams that I just had nothing, so the title's a lie. We're going to start in the Eastern Conference and go in order of the NBA standings. So, Milwaukee. I think they desperately are in need of consistent shooting, so ideally they get someone who can replace Wes Matthews as a starter. You can trade Pat Connaughton and Grayson Allen and get about $18 million in cap space, and you can use that on someone like Gary Trent Jr. in a sign-and trade, or you can move them for Joe Harris on the low end, Buddy Hield on the high end. I do understand that ironically, the 2 players that Milwaukee would be shipping are both shooters, but they're inconsistent ones, and I just know that Joe Harris, Gary Trent, Buddy Hield, they're bona fide shooters, and especially ones that you can truly rely on. Obviously, Buddy Hield would be the best option, but the issue I think the Bucks have had over the past few years is they're a 3-point heavy offense without having really that many excellent 3-point shooters. I'd say they literally only have one, that being Chris Middleton, and Pat Connaughton can occasionally be really good. For the Boston Celtics, trade Jaylen Brown for a playmaker, whether that be Damian Lillard or some other idea. You cannot pay this guy the supermax. And if you're looking for the replacement player with him, get somebody who is complementary to Jason Tatum, not just another shot-creating defensive wing. That's not complementary to Jason. A guard, a playmaker, regardless of who it may be, that's something they need, and more than they need that, they need to not pay Jaylen Brown $50, $60 million a year. For the Philadelphia 76ers, try to sign or trade for a defensive-minded wing who can shoot. I'd personally go all in on OG Anunoby. I think you can put together a couple of contracts to get to that salary, and I believe they have some draft picks that they can trade because they didn't give up that much in the James Harden deal. So yeah, I think OG would really turn things around for the Sixers. They didn't really have a strong point of attack defender, which was a huge issue for them. Frankly, I think OG would be the difference between them making the conference finals or not. I do think that's a good idea. I also want to give you a heads up. I'm going to suggest a lot of teams trade for OG because the Raptors are probably blowing it up, and OG is a guy who fits any team, and any team would want him. For the Cleveland Cavaliers, try to trade for / sign a defensive-minded wing who can shoot. The same thing I said about the Sixers, although you can't really get OG because that's just really expensive, so try for Harrison Barnes or Torrey Craig on the cheap end. Maybe trade Isaac Okoro and Ricky Rubio and Dean Wade to clear up cap space to sign Jeremy Grant or Josh Hart. But of all of those vague ideas, I'd probably just go for Torrey Craig because I believe he's a truly underrated role player, and you could probably get him for about $10 million a year. For the New York Knicks, you need to sign shooting, whether that be Malik Beasley, Seth Curry, or Lonnie Walker. I felt like for the Knicks, the issue that they ran into versus Miami was they just couldn't shoot the damn ball. They have guys who shoot okay in the regular season, but when it came to being like a legit three-point shooter, they had very little to bank on, and they managed to shoot worse than the Heat in the playoffs from three, when the Heat shot 32% from three in that series. I'm talking about the series specifically, not the playoffs at large. But yeah, they shot like 30-something% versus Miami, and that was their downfall. So cheap shooting, good idea. For For the Brooklyn Nets, see what you can get for Spencer Dinwiddie. This is what I mean by stuff that's like a vague idea. Like, yeah, Spencer Dinwiddie doesn't make a ton of sense for this team unless they're trying to be like marginally competitive, and I think you'd just be better off getting a youngish player or like a draft pick. For the Atlanta Hawks, run Saddiq Bey and DeAndre Hunter as your forwards. When the Atlanta Hawks had Saddiq Bey as a stretch 4, rather than John Collins as a pretend stretch 4 out there, they just looked like a way more fluid and a straight up just good basketball team. The spacing was significantly better, as you would expect. I just think it only makes sense to move on from John Collins. If you're not going to use him like in the pick and roll all the time, or like give him post touches that he's decent at, then it really seems useless to play him. Like, he's not an exceptional defender and he's not an exceptional 3-point shooter. So if you're going to treat him like a 3-and-D player, you're not getting a lot of value out of him. So get rid of him and actually use the 3-and-D player that you traded for instead. For the Miami Heat, trade for Bradley Beal or Dame. I wrote this before the Bradley Beal trade. So, yeah, it looks like they're going to have to go all in on Damian Lillard, and you're just going to have to pray that this is finally the time. I do think there's a lot of signs pointing to this finally being the time where Dame would truly be okay with a trade. And he specifically said in an interview that the Miami Heat, if they lost the championship, would be the team he was most interested in playing for. So the cards are on the table. It's a possibility. Is it likely? Probably not. But frankly, I think a desperate move is what Miami needs to make happen in order to make anything happen at all. For the Chicago Bulls, sign and trade Vucevic for DeAndre Ayton. I would also throw in like Alex Caruso in that deal. I'm trying to buy low on DeAndre, and although that is kind of a lot, I admit, that's a lot, isn't it? It's maybe too much. I don't know. Again, this was made before the Bradley Beal trade, and I feel like they'd want not Vucevic after that trade. So I'm going to come up with something new on the spot. Trade Alex Caruso for Moses Moody on the Warriors. The Warriors need a guy who's a more established role player, a defensive guy, a playmaker, and Moses Moody, even though he's been decent and the rotation minutes he's gotten, is definitely a young player that probably needs time to develop. And the Warriors don't really have time to develop him, so it only makes sense, young player for vet now. And I obviously want the Bulls to rebuild, and I really like Moses Moody, and I think it's a relatively fair exchange of value and makes sense circumstance-wise for both sides. So there you go. On the spot, even though I've thought of this trade before, but whatever. For the Toronto Raptors, it's obviously time to blow it up. Fred VanVleet is probably leaving. They just fired Nick Nurse. It seems kind of obvious things are turning around, and I do wonder if you could get like Keegan Murray and draft picks from Sacramento for Siakam. Sacramento is a team that makes a lot of sense for Pascal Siakam. I'm sure there are other teams that can bid out there, but yeah, cash in on your players, essentially. There's just one idea I throw out there. For the Indiana Pacers, another vague idea, just see what you can get for Buddy Hield. If you can get like a pretty solid first-round pick out of the guy and some like expiring money, you know, it's worth doing. There's some argument to be made that just like having a guy that's a really good assist option for Tyrese Haliburton is cool, but personally, if I'm the Indiana Pacers, I'm more interested in getting a high draft pick than Tyrese Haliburton averaging 2 more assists a game. That's just me, though. For the Washington Wizards, they've done a pretty excellent job of offloading the players that they have and getting what they can for them, given the context of Beal and Kristaps's like contract situation. I feel like they made the best of what they could, and frankly, they should just continue to do that with the veterans that they do have. Trade like DeLon Wright, for example, for, some second-round picks. See if you can do a sign and trade involving Kyle Kuzma. Just get whatever assets you can that are remaining. Obviously, you're just going to kind of suck for the rest of this year, so get what you can for your future, and don't worry at all about trying to be good right now. I know that seems kind of obvious with a rebuilding team, but this is the Wizards we're talking about. For the Orlando Magic, I recommend that they trade for Monte Morris. I think I'm going to recommend a Monte Morris trade later. He's a point guard on the Wizards. He was really, really good for the Denver Nuggets. Not as much for the Wizards, but also like he went from Jokic to the Wizards. So I do think he's a very, very good backup point guard to potentially a pretty good one. And if the Orlando Magic are trying to be a, good team going forward with Paolo and Franz and Wendell, this would be a guy who can give you more veteran leadership and help you win now. Markelle Fultz would probably start over him, and you obviously have Cole Anthony as well. So potentially you worry about it being too many small guards, but I think it works out, and you also would not have to pay a lot to get him. Either way, the vague idea is I do think a couple of veteran guys that can help you win now, who hopefully don't cost too much, is the way that Orlando should go. Maybe they're going to try and tank again. I wouldn't blame them necessarily, but I think they have a strong enough young core now with their, main three guys that they should start to look towards actually trying to win basketball games. For the Charlotte Hornets, I would try and move Terry Rozier for a 3-and-D guy. Charlotte has actually been a pretty damn good defensive team for the past few years, so I feel like if you can get them to just be like an actually excellent defense, which is doubling down on defense would be a great way to do that, you can get to the point where you're like, top 5 in defense and 15 on offense, and like that's a pretty good playoff team, even potentially like a second round level team. And I am also a big believer in Mark Williams, who is the center on the Hornets, a young guy. Hopefully they give him a lot of opportunity early, and I think just defensively this team could end up turning things around. Terry Rozier, not much of a defensive guy. He has his moments, but not really that. And I think they have enough guard creation as it is. For the Detroit Pistons, I honestly do not have a particularly strong take here. I feel like they could use some more shooting and more of a veteran presence, because I do believe with the right organization of the pieces on this roster, you could potentially compete for like a play-in spot. But yeah, there's still a lot of wait and see with this team. Now we move over to the Western Conference. For the Denver Nuggets, I'm going to say sign/trade for/draft a backup playmaker. Obviously, more likely than not, that would be a guard. One of the only holes that I saw in Denver as a team was just not a lot of creation outside of Jokic and Murray. Obviously, they were both so excellent at it that it did not matter, but there were moments for sure with Denver, especially when Jokic was sitting, or it was like, it'd be nice if there was someone else out here that could make a play, and, investing in a guy who would play like 15 minutes a game in the playoffs would be cool. Obviously, a team that won a championship doesn't need to make any major moves, but this is something that they could do to improve marginally, give themselves a little bit more versatility. For the Memphis Grizzlies, I think them above all else makes sense to just go all in for OG Anunoby. They really pushed for Mikal Bridges, and that would have been very interesting, but I don't think Brooklyn has any interest in making that move happen, as evidenced by the fact that they declined it to begin with. Meanwhile, OG can probably do similar things to Mikal Bridges in terms of what Memphis wanted him to do. Obviously less shot creation, but he can score like 18 points a game within the flow of the offense for the most part, and be a good three-point shooter, a pretty excellent one at times, and a very, very good defensive guy, and he can be that defensive wing that the Memphis Grizzlies had in Dillon Brooks without him being garbage on offense. In fact, he's a plus offensive player rather than a significant negative, and I feel like 2 first-round picks, maybe 3, can get the job done, with the third one being like protected. I think it's worth exploring, because I think OG would really round that team out, especially as good as they are defensively. Adding a defender on OG's level on top of that, I think that's the way to go. Double down on that defense, improve on offense at the same time, and you've got a better team with a better fit. It would just be so much better. I honestly don't know why there's not more OG to the Grizzlies rumors. It makes so much sense to me. For the Sacramento Kings, sign Kyle Kuzma or some other large wing. Potentially they could get it on OG themselves, but I think what Sacramento ran into was they really did not have much size outside of Domantas Sabonis. He was getting killed on the glass and really didn't have anybody else to aid him in that category. Obviously that killing him on the glass being by Kevon Looney. Someone like Kyle Kuzma can work within the flow of that offense, especially that fast-paced offense, be a pretty good defender, have a lot of size, being that he's 6'10" with long arms, and be a plus rebounder. For the Phoenix Suns, I wrote, don't trade for Bradley Beal. Try and sign and trade for Fred VanVleet. Too late, buddy. So I guess I'll change it to try and get 2 good role players out of DeAndre Ayton. If you can, get another center who's pretty good and a good defensive wing, and maybe sign like 2 vets who are decent enough rotation players, you can convince me this team can win a championship. But unless that exact event transpires, they will not. Unless DeAndre Ayton just wants to be awesome and they keep him because of that. But I don't know. I'm not feeling good about that. For the Los Angeles Clippers, bring back Russ. Now, this kind of broke a rule because I didn't want to do anything that was just bring back this player because it seems kind of bland. But Russ was so good for the Clippers, it makes a lot of sense for me for them to just do that. For the Golden State Warriors, I wrote trade for Bradley Beal, which means I'm also going to have to edit this thumbnail because I put him in the fucking thumbnail. The Phoenix Suns ruined my day in so many ways by making that trade. If you want to hear my reaction to it, it's the second most recent upload on this channel. So what I would suggest, given the Jordan Poole trade, I think they're going to need that scoring presence off of the bench, and obviously Jordan was not that in the postseason. But if you're looking for someone that could potentially do a lot of that stuff while being much cheaper, I would see if it's possible to sign Jordan Clarkson. He does a lot of what Jordan Poole does without, being so much less successful without the ball in his hands. And you could probably get him for like $15 to $17 million a year with re-signing Draymond Green and with the new CBA. Maybe it's not possible to achieve that, but maybe moving contracts around it is. I don't know. Otherwise, there really is not a great option for replacing that kind of bench production. But I do think Jordan Clarkson would be an excellent fit there in Golden State. For the Los Angeles Lakers, sign Kyrie. I know there's a good chance it won't happen, and I know there's a lot of baggage that comes with Kyrie, obviously, but I think the Lakers are in the perfect amount of desperation for this to be a worthwhile affair. At the same time, Austin Reeves and Rui Hachimura, you can't bring both of those guys back and bring in Kyrie unless Kyrie is just going to take an absurd pay cut. So it is worthy of debating, like, is Reeves and Rui just ultimately a better thing? I can see that argument, but I do think going for Kyrie does put the ceiling of this team pretty freaking high, and there would be legitimate championship aspirations from there. For the Minnesota Timberwolves, trade Karl Anthony Towns. I'm not sure what for, but get it done. Frankly, I think this team would just be significantly better if Cat just wasn't on it, period. Like, just getting rid of him would make them a better team. And this isn't me, like, acting like Cat is some terrible player, but I think, ironically, in the process of trying to build the right team around Cat, the Timberwolves just built a good team that doesn't actually fit Cat. So he's the odd man out here. I don't know what the deal would look like. It's kind of weird to think about who would actually even really want him, given the context of a lot of teams around the league. But yeah, get rid of Karl Anthony Towns. For the New Orleans Pelicans, I have no idea. They're in some weird stuff right now, and I really just couldn't think of anything. For the OKC Thunder, trade for Pascal Siakam. Just like the Sacramento Kings, this is a team that I think it makes a lot of sense to trade for Pascal Siakam because OKC obviously has a very significant chest full of assets, and they could realistically probably trade a bad contract. There's actually a lot of cap space. So just like somebody plus 3 first-round picks when they have 40 of them and still be well on their way to a good rebuild, but also a guaranteed playoff team this year. Because I do think that Pascal plus Shea equals playoff spot and less injuries, as well as Chet Holmgren potentially, really shaking things up. What Jalen Williams is going to do in his second year. I think that's a worthwhile decision, and Pascal is also young enough that, when this team's trying to be like a championship level team in like 3 years, he'll still be a part of that ride. So yeah, I think he makes a lot of sense for them. For the Dallas Mavericks, sign and trade for Jakob Poeltl. Given that the Toronto Raptors are trying to blow this thing up again, is what I think the direction is here. I do think there's a chance just a couple of second-round picks and an expiring contract can get you Jakob, and I think like Tim Hardaway Jr. is expiring, if I'm not mistaken. But he is just the best defensive guy they're going to get that is like reachable. So I think they should hardcore like go all in for this guy personally. For the Utah Jazz, trade Kelly Olynyk for some seconds. Just, the only guy who's like a win now rotation player really, other than obviously like Lauri Markkanen. But, veteran guy, not someone you're invested in their future. Get what you can for him. For the Portland Trailblazers, trade Dame. I know it won't happen. It probably won't anyways. I do think, as I mentioned earlier, the odds feel higher than ever before, but it probably won't happen because they're a stubborn-ass organization, and he's a stubborn-ass player. But, presuming that it's not going to happen, I'm not going to sit here and give them ideas for shit to do to continue this bullshit. Screw it. I'm not going to give you suggestions for that. Not that the Portland GM's watching this, but I'm not going to entertain that stupid decision. For the Houston Rockets, I have no idea. And for the San Antonio Spurs, trade for Monte Morris. Yes, I'm suggesting this again. A vet playmaking point guard who can set up Wemby. I do really like Trey Jones, but in case he is not ready for that role, Morris can step in, and at the bare minimum, he makes for a great backup at the least. Yeah, I think I summarized it pretty well right there. Good point guard, good assist turnover guy, can set up Wemby very well. Trey Jones might not quite be ready, so it's good to have another option, because having a not great guy for setting up Wemby would kind of knock his rookie year a little bit. So yeah, anyways, this video is long enough, so I'm not going to keep rambling. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video, and goodbye.